Have you ever wondered what it was like to work at a McDonald's back in the 1950s? Not the fast-paced modern chain we know today, but something smaller, slower. In this story, we're going to take you behind the counter. We'll explore how McDonald's began to grow across America, what the very first workers did during their shifts, how food was prepared before there were machines for everything, and what it felt like to be part of a system that was still being built, one burger at a time. So, if you're ready, find a comfortable spot, tuck in, dim the lights, and let's begin the story of what it was like to be a McDonald's worker in the 1950s. But before we begin, please like the video and subscribe before you fall asleep, but only if you really like the content I make. Also, write in the comments where you are from and when you are watching. It is so interesting to see where people are watching from around the world. Thank you. Before the arches were golden, before there were billions served, before drive-thrus, mascots, or combo meals, there was a squat little building on E Street in San Bernardino, California, and in the fall of 1948, it reopened under a new idea, a risky idea, one that would shape the way the world eats and how millions would one day work. This wasn't the first restaurant opened by the McDonald brothers, Richard and Maurice McDonald. In fact, they'd been at it since 1940. Their original business, McDonald's Barbecue, was a modest car-hop-style drive-in that served over 25 different menu items: ribs, ham sandwiches, tamales, malts. It was a classic of its kind, chaotic, sprawling, and inefficient. It made money, but not much, and by the end of the war, the brothers wanted something simpler, something cleaner, something faster. So in October of 1948, after months of redesign, experimentation, and hesitation, they reopened their restaurant with a completely different philosophy. Gone were the car hops, gone were the trays, the cigarette machines, the jukeboxes, and the waitresses on roller skates. Instead, they offered just 9 items, no substitutions, no delays, just hamburgers, cheeseburgers, fries, milkshakes, and a few soft drinks. They called it the Speedy Service System, and it was revolutionary. Food was prepared like it was on an assembly line. Hamburgers were cooked in batches and wrapped in advance. Fries were measured, timed, and salted by the second. Shakes came from a custom-designed machine that could make multiple servings at once. There was no dining room, just a walk-up counter and a parking lot at a time when most people still associated food with diners, soda fountains, and home-cooked plates. This new system was cold, metallic, and brutally efficient. It was strange, and it worked. The prices were shocking. Just 15 cents for a hamburger, 10 cents for fries. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't leisurely, but it was clean, predictable, fast, and it was about to change everything, not just for customers, but for the workers who would come next. Because to make a system like this run, to keep the grills humming, the lines moving, and the buns toasted to the second, it needed a new kind of employee. Not a chef, not a server, not a jack of all trades, but a cog in a carefully calibrated machine. And over the next few years, that machine would grow. By the start of 1949, the new McDonald's wasn't so new anymore. The soft October relaunch had come and gone. The white-tiled stand with the 9-item menu had weathered its first few months, and San Bernardino had made up its mind. This place was strange, but it worked. It didn't feel like a restaurant in the traditional sense. There were no trays, no menus handed out, no waitresses, just a short walk-up counter and a lot of chrome and glass. You didn't sit, you didn't linger. You ordered, paid, and returned to your car, hamburger in hand, fries in a paper bag, soda in a wax cup, and from behind that counter, everything was in motion. The brothers, Dick and Mac, now spent less time on charm and more time on process. Everything had to be timed. Every movement in the kitchen had to be justified. The grill man was stationed between the meat press and the warming cabinet. The fryer was never more than 3 steps from the salt shaker. Milkshake mix was pre-measured. Buns were delivered daily, already sliced. That the speedy service system wasn't just a philosophy, it was choreography. They didn't call it fast food yet, but that's exactly what it was. And with the customers returning faster than they could have hoped, the need for structure became urgent. The system couldn't run on 2 brothers alone. They needed help. They needed employees. But not just anyone. Working at McDonald's in early 1949 meant one thing above all else: consistency. You didn't bring creativity. You didn't bring personality. You brought focus, precision, reliability. Whether you were hired to man the grill, run the fry station, refill napkin dispensers, or hand off orders to customers, the job required that you disappear into the system. The kitchen wasn't a workplace, it was a machine. You were just one of its parts. There was no onboarding process, no corporate orientation, and certainly no training video. You learned by watching, mimicking, and moving fast. Mac or Dick would walk you through your station once, maybe twice. After that, you were expected to be ready. It was hot. The uniform white shirt, black slacks, paper had offered no protection from the grill's heat or the fryer's hiss. You stood for hours. Breaks were rare and informal. If you were caught wiping your brow or checking the clock, you were told, politely but firmly, to stay focused. And yet, there was something appealing about it. For many of the workers hired in that first year, this wasn't just a job, it was a step into something new. Cleaner than dishwashing. More structured than odd jobs. And even though the pay was modested out 35 to 50 cents an hour, depending on the task, it was dependable, predictable. You always knew what to expect. Teenagers were drawn to it. High school boys came after school. A few war veterans, recently discharged, picked up hours for extra income. A handful of young women worked early shifts. Though the kitchen's physical demands and the stand-up homely layout made the job heavily male-skewed in the early years, you didn't have to smile at customers. In fact, you were encouraged not to waste time on small talk. What mattered was the rhythm. You cooked 6 burgers at once. You timed the flip. You placed 2 pickles, 1 squirt of ketchup, 1 of mustard, a pinch of diced onion, wrap, stack, repeat. The fry station had its own rhythm. Fries were cut fresh every morning. Russet potatoes delivered in sacks, peeled and sliced using a hand-cranked cutting machine. They were soaked in cold water to remove starch, then dried, then fried, not once, but twice. First, a slow fry to cook the inside, then a second dip, hotter and faster, to get that crisp, golden edge. They were salted not by sight or feel, but using a shaker rigged to release a precise, measured amount every time. It wasn't gourmet, but it was engineered. Customers didn't rave about the food. They raved about the speed. You could walk up, order a full meal, and be walking back to your car in under a minute. For travelers on Route 66, families on the go, and teens in a hurry, it was magic, and soon the line rarely stopped. With success, however, came stress. There were no days off, no backup staff. The kitchen was small, and any worker who didn't show up meant the whole operation slowed. On weekends, the line wrapped around the parking lot, and Dick would stand near the counter with a stopwatch, trying to identify where the process was breaking down. There were no backup fridges, no computerized timers, no food warmers that could hold temperature for hours. If you ran out of patties, you had to grind more. If the soda syrup ran dry, you had to mix another batch on the fly. There was no margin for error, and still people came in droves. They didn't come for novelty anymore. They came because they knew exactly what they were going to get. The fries would be hot. The burger would be wrapped the same way. The milkshake would taste like it did last time. The McDonald brothers had created something bigger than just a stand. They'd created expectation, and the workers, though underpaid, overworked, and rarely praised, were the ones holding it all together. By the end of 1949, the San Bernardino McDonald's was turning a profit that would have seemed impossible just a year before. Word spread. Newspaper clippings started appearing in other cities. Other business owners, curious, inspired, maybe even a little jealous, came to watch how it worked. The lines kept growing. The hours stayed long, and the brothers, tireless, detail-obsessed, kept refining the system. At the time, no one knew what was coming next. Not the workers flipping patties, not the customers unwrapping their burgers, and not even Dick and Mac, standing in the lot, watching cars circle in and out. But change was coming. It was about to drive up in a Ford sedan, step out in a crisp suit, and ask a deceptively simple question. Have you ever thought about franchising? It was a Tuesday morning in April 1954 when he first pulled into the lot. Ray Kroc, traveling milkshake machine salesman, mid-50s, always in a suit, even in the California sun. His hands were soft from years of driving and shaking hands, not flipping burgers. He walked slowly toward the counter, squinting through the reflection on the glass. In his briefcase, brochures for the Prince Castle multi-mixer, a stainless steel milkshake machine that could make 5 shakes at once. He didn't come to eat. He came because the McDonald brothers had ordered 8 of his machines. No one ever ordered 8. From the moment he stepped behind the counter, Ray Kroc saw something different. The kitchen ran like a factory. Workers didn't talk. They moved. They chopped. They flipped. They filled bags. Each task was so refined it was almost mechanical. Every surface was spotless. Every station had a purpose. Even the way the burgers were stacked on the warming tray seemed choreographed. Kroc was stunned. This wasn't a restaurant. It was a blueprint. He ate a cheeseburger, then another. He watched fries drop in perfect rhythm. He watched teens on their lunch break laugh and run back to their cars with paper bags. And in that moment, Kroc's thinking changed. He wasn't just looking at a burger stand. He was looking at a system that could be scaled. He approached Dick and Mac friendly, but direct. He asked questions, took notes, jotted down measurements. He asked for numbers, foot traffic, daily ticket totals, turnover times. The brothers were suspicious, friendly, but hesitant. They didn't want investors. They didn't want partners. But Ray didn't want to buy them out. Not yet. He wanted something simpler. Permission to franchise the system, to open new locations, run by others, but using their model. He would handle the logistics, the contracts, the scouting, the people. They agreed, and only because they believed no one else could ever run a McDonald's quite like they did in 1955. The first new McDonald's opened in Des Plaines, Illinois, Ray Kroc's store. It was nearly identical in design. Red and white tile, walk-up windows, a bright, neon speedy mascot. A menu limited to burgers, fries, drinks, and shakes. But behind the scenes, everything was changing. The new location needed employees, but there were no corporate recruiters, no HR departments. Kroc hired local teens, gave them clean uniforms, put them through a version of the McDonald brothers' informal training but with added structure. He emphasized the same things: speed, cleanliness, uniformity, no deviations. Every burger must taste the same. Every shake must pour the same thickness. Fries must be salted for exactly 7 seconds. Kroc installed timers, light-up heat lamps, and warming drawers with thermometers. He hired local managers and drilled into them: it's not just fast, it's predictably fast. He didn't want workers who thought for themselves. He wanted workers who followed the system. For the employees at Dayplanes, it was an intense environment. You had to memorize the manual. Yes, there was a manual now. It told you how to stand, how to greet customers, how many times to stir the shake mix, how to stack the burger wrappers. Everything was being documented, processed, measured. Kroc wasn't satisfied with just copying what the brothers had done. He wanted to tighten it, and for workers, that meant more control, more rules, and less room for error. Back in San Bernardino, the original workers heard about the new store. Some were flattered, some were worried. Kroc had already opened a McDonald's corporation, his corporation. He was promising franchisees the same system, but with a sharper corporate edge. He wrote letters, made calls. He wanted more stores, more cities, more workers wearing the same uniform, saying the same lines. The brothers were hesitant. They feared it was moving too fast. But by 1956, Kroc had opened several new locations, and behind the counter, something was shifting. The culture of the job began to change in the early days. Employees had flexibility. If the fryer broke, you improvised. If a delivery was late, you explained. You were allowed to solve problems. But under Kroc's model, there was only one right way to do things, and deviating from it even to help was discouraged. Workers began to feel it. Schedules were stricter. Uniforms had to be perfect. Managers were trained to correct posture, voice, tone, and tray placement. You were timed during lunch rushes. Mistakes were logged. And yet, people still applied. The job had become something new. A national system job. Clean, decent pay, steady hours. It felt like the future. And for a time, it was by the end of 1956. Kroc had opened 15 McDonald's. A year later, there were 40. The Golden Arches, still relatively new, were starting to pop up across the Midwest and West Coast. The name McDonald's no longer meant just San Bernardino. It meant fast food. And while Kroc shook hands with franchisees and negotiated with suppliers, it was the workers, still teenagers, still over hot grills, who kept the system alive. By 1956, McDonald's was multiplying. Not rapidly yet, not like it would in the decades to come, but steadily. Quietly, new locations sprouted up across the Midwest and Southwest. Most looked nearly identical. Redand, white tile, stainless, steel counters, the speedy mascot flashing his hamburger sign out front, and behind the counter, a growing number of workers now wore the uniform. It was simple: a white button-up shirt, black slacks, a narrow paper hat folded in 3 neat points. Nothing flashy, no logos, no golden arches on your chest. Just clean lines and a clear expectation. Do your job, and do it exactly the way the manual says. Franchisees were coming in with excitement and pressure. They had bought into a promise. that McDonald's wasn't just a restaurant, it was a system, and that meant every location, no matter the city, no matter the staff, would feel the same. So if you were hired as a worker in one of these new locations in, say, Sacramento or Phoenix or Chicago, you weren't just being trained by your manager. You were being trained by the brand. The manual was sacred. It told you how to portion the fries, 2.5 ounces per bag, how to build the burger, bottom bun, patty, ketchup, mustard, 2 pickles, diced onion, top bun, how to time the cook, 3.5 minutes per burger, never more than 6 on the grill at once, how to greet the customer, 1 word, next. You were taught to move quickly, but quietly. Always appear busy. Never let your hands rest. If you finished your task early, you cleaned. If you finished cleaning, you checked the bins. If the bins were full, you polished the counter. There was no music, no chatter, no individuality. For some, it was stifling. For others, it was peaceful. McDonald's was never advertised as a career. It was a job. And for a young worker in the late 1950s, that was enough. You were 15, maybe 17. You got your uniform pressed on Sunday night. You worked weekends or afternoons after school. The pay wasn't glamorous, still hovering around 50 cents an hour. But the hours were regular. The expectations clear. It was a place to learn discipline, punctuality, cleanliness, eye contact. It wasn't unusual for parents to walk their kids to their first day of work and thank the manager for teaching them some responsibility. But as the company grew, cracks started to show. Not all franchise owners followed the rules. Some cut corners, used cheaper beef, made the shakes thinner, rushed the fry timing to push out more orders. Others hired fewer workers to save money, meaning the staff on shift had to hustle harder to keep up. And while Ray Kroc's team sent inspectors quiet, clipboard-carrying observers who scored stores on cleanliness and timing, there were limits to how much control they really had. After all, each franchise was technically owned by someone else, which meant that as a worker, your experience could vary wildly depending on where you were hired. In the more tightly run stores, your manager knew your name. You were expected to clock in 2 minutes early, keep your hat straight, and never eat on shift. You were allowed 1 meal, free, at the end of the night, usually a burger, small fries, and a drink. That was considered generous. In other stores, the rules were looser. You might be asked to stay an extra hour without notice. You might be sweeping the lot at closing while others locked the doors. Overtime pay, not a guarantee. Turnover was high. A lot of workers didn't last more than a few weeks. The ones who stayed were either unusually dedicated or simply had no other job in town, and through it all, McDonald's kept expanding. By 1958, just 4 years after Ray Kroc had visited San Bernardino, the company had sold its 100 millionth hamburger. That number wasn't for show, was real. And every one of those 100 million was made by hand, pressed, grilled, wrapped, and bagged by teenagers, by single parents, by retirees, by whoever could follow the system. The food hadn't changed much, but the process was becoming sharper. The uniforms were more consistent. The expectations dash higher, and in Ray Kroc's head, the vision was still expanding. He wanted 1,000 stores, then 10,000. He wanted America to see McDonald's as a part of daily life, predictable, clean, fast, and friendly. But friendly didn't mean comfortable. For workers, the years ahead would bring more structure, more rules, and more pressure, because you weren't just part of a team anymore. You were part of a brand. By the end of the 1950s, the world outside the Golden Arches was changing fast. Rock and roll was exploding. Suburbs were stretching farther and wider. Drive-in movie theaters were filling up on Saturday nights, and McDonald's, it was quietly becoming part of the American landscape. At first, the growth seemed steady, controlled, but behind the scenes, Ray Kroc had switched gears. His ambition had shifted from building a business to building an empire. In 1959, there were about 100 McDonald's restaurants open across the US. By 1961, there would be over 230 and 4 every new location. There were uniforms to press, grills to man, fries to drop. The system needed workers more than ever. But something else happened in 1961. Something quiet. A handshake. A check. A final split. Ray Kroc bought out the McDonald brothers for $2.70 million. No fanfare, no press conference, just paperwork, contracts, and a quiet agreement that the brothers could keep using their original location, but not the name. From that moment on, Kroc was in full control, and his vision for McDonald's went beyond efficiency. He wanted uniformity, total, unshakable uniformity. For workers, this meant the job you applied to in 1961 looked very different from the job someone had taken in 1955. There was more corporate oversight now. Training became standardized. Some locations had laminated checklists posted in the back. How to clean the grill, how to rotate meat, how often to wash your hands. Managers received binders. There were performance reviews, secret shoppers, and, above all else, silence. The back of house became a quiet zone. No whistling, no singing. Talking was discouraged unless it was necessary. If you had time to chat, you had time to sweep, wipe, or restock. This wasn't just about food anymore, it was about discipline. The routine was sharp. You arrived 10 minutes early. If you were late, even once, you got fewer hours next week. You clocked in, tied your apron, washed your hands, and reported to your station. You weren't assigned randomly. Every employee had a role. Grill man, press, flip, wrap, fry station, cut, soak, fry, salt, restock, runner, assemble bags, pour drinks, keep pace with the line, front counter, take orders fast, exact change, no banter. During a lunch rush, the entire store ran like a well-oiled machine. Orders came in every few seconds. You didn't stop. You didn't even think much. It was muscle memory, timing, heat for new hires. The job felt almost military. And that wasn't an accident. Ray Kroc admired the US Army's ability to train, standardize, and manage people from all backgrounds. He once said that McDonald's should run like a military unit in peacetime. So uniforms became sharper. Dress codes were enforced. Hair had to be neat, fingernails clean, shoes polished. For many workers, especially young men, it was their first experience with such structure, and while some chafed at it, others thrived. It gave their day shape, predictability, a sense of purpose, even if the task was as simple as scooping fries or timing shakes. But beneath the order, stress simmered. If you were short-staffed, there was no support line to call. If a machine broke, you made do. If a customer was rude, you smiled and moved on. You had no HR, no sick leave, no union. You were expected to perform or be replaced. And there were always more kids willing to wear the paper hat. Teenagers liked the job because it felt modern. It wasn't dirty factory work or dangerous farm labor. You didn't need a degree. You didn't need experience. Just a clean shirt and the ability to move fast. But the job rarely lasted long. Few workers stayed more than a few months. In the break room, if your store had won, you'd find a few plastic chairs, a dusty table, and maybe a vending machine. That was your moment of quiet. You'd sit, sip a soda, stare at your shoes. Your legs would ache. Your shirt would smell faintly of fry oil. Some days, you'd leave your shift feeling invisible, like part of a mechanism. Other days, you felt proud. You were part of something that worked, and even if it didn't pay much, it ran on your labor. By 1961, the Golden Arches had become more than a shape. They were a promise. Fast food, fast service, familiar faces. What the customers couldn't see was what it took to make that promise real. The hands that flipped the patties, the feet that never stopped moving, the faces behind the counter, always smiling, even when they were exhausted. And with every new McDonald's that opened, the demand for those hands, feet, and faces only grew, because the future was no longer just about burgers. It was about scale, and it was only just beginning. By the early 1960s, McDonald's had grown too big for improvisation. The system had proven itself. Customers kept coming back. Stores kept opening. But with each new location came new workers, and each new worker needed to know exactly what to do from day one. So the company turned to something it hadn't needed in the early days: formal training. That meant binders, diagrams, instruction sheets, rules not just for food but for behavior. If you were hired at McDonald's in 1962, your first day wasn't spent on the grill. It was spent with a manager, sometimes in the back office, sometimes in the dining area. Before opening, you'd be handed a short employee handbook and walked through the fundamentals. Keep your uniform clean and wrinkle-free ways. Smile at the customer. Never talk back to a manager. Wipe down your station even if it looks clean. Move with purpose. Never stand idle. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't exciting, but it was clear, and for the right kind of person, especially teenagers. Just starting out, that structure offered something few other jobs did: certainty. You weren't expected to know much. You were expected to follow. You were shown how to use the shake machine, how long to toast the buns, how to salt the fries evenly. You were given practice drills: stacking trays, building a proper burger, timing your movements across the kitchen. It felt almost like learning a dance. And the better you were at repeating the steps, the more praise you got. But not all managers were equal. Some took training seriously, watching new hires like hawks, correcting every error, timing their hands as they reached for wrappers or burger buns. Others were checked out, distracted, or overwhelmed. In those stores, you were left to shadow someone else, soften a teen not much older than you. If you made a mistake, someone would shrug or laugh it off. But when rush hour came, you either kept up or got pulled from the line. Turnover stayed high. The job was tough, repetitive, and offered little upward mobility. Promotions usually went to older, more stable workers, many of whom were male, and often former military. For them, McDonald's felt familiar, hierarchical, simple. For the rest, it was a stopgap. Still, McDonald's was trying to build something more lasting. Kroc didn't just want burger flippers, he wanted ambassadors, employees who moved fast, smiled always, and became part of the McDonald's experience. That meant training went beyond tasks. It became behavioral. You were taught how to stand, how to walk, how to speak to customers, even in conflict. No arguing, no sarcasm, just apologies, patience, and quiet correction. The customer is always right wasn't just a phrase. It was a command. Workers were also trained in product presentation. Burgers had to be wrapped perfectly folded, on the sides, label facing up. Fries had to be upright in their paper pouch. Milkshakes were filled 3/4, with the lid pressed, snug, and straw placed neatly to the side. Nothing was random, nothing was improvised. This wasn't a diner. It was a machine. And like any machine, it ran best when the parts were properly maintained. Breaks were short, usually 10 minutes, sometimes 15 if the store was quiet. You'd sit at a plastic table in the back, maybe near the mop sink, and sip from a small drink cup. You weren't allowed to eat during your shift unless approved, and if you dropped food on the floor, you threw it away no matter how hungry you were. For some employees, that made the place feel cold, unforgiving. For others, it made it clean, professional, modern, and by 1963, McDonald's was becoming exactly that. That year, the company opened its 500th location. It also introduced something new, a smiling cartoon clown, Ronald McDonald. He appeared on television in commercials aimed at children, cheerful, colorful, inviting. McDonald's was repositioning itself as a family brand. The stores were cleaner, the signs were bigger, playgrounds were being considered, birthday parties were beginning to appear, but none of that changed what it felt like behind the counter. The kitchen was still hot, the shifts were still long, and the job still depended on young hands moving in perfect rhythm. You didn't need to be creative. You didn't need to be clever. You just had to be fast, consistent, and quiet. Because in the McDonald's of the early 1960s, success didn't come from standing out. It came from blending in. By 1963, McDonald's had stopped being an experiment. It was now a fixture, not just in California or Illinois, but across dozens of towns and cities in America if you lived near a major road. It was only a matter of time before a new redanned white stand popped up with bright signage. The speedy mascator increasingly, a smiling clown and a row of teenage workers dressed neatly behind the glass. For customers, it was fast and familiar. For workers, it was something else entirely. Teenagers made up the bulk of the staff. High schoolers, mostly. Boys were favored for the grill and fry station. Girls often placed on counter duty, where a clean uniform and a bright smile were quietly expected. Shifts were designed around school schedules. You'd come in after the final bell rang, clock in by 3:30, and work until close around 9 or 10 p.m. on weekdays. Later on weekends. For many of these young workers, it was their first taste of structure outside the home, and McDonald's offered plenty of it. You were trained in order, not just what to do, but when to do it. Start by checking your station, wiping the counters, topping off sauces, lining up trays, double-check the freezer, restock the buns. If it was your day to man the fryer, you'd load the basket, lower it at exactly the right time, and shake off the oil with a practiced flick of the wrist. Every task had a rhythm, and that rhythm never changed. Even your breaks followed a rhythm. You were told when to take them, how long they lasted, and what you could do. Usually sit, drink water, and reset before the next rush. No loitering, no wandering to the lot. Just back and forth from break room to station, station to break room. And yet, there was a comfort in that. The predictability, the routine that you showed up. You followed the steps. You left with your shirt smelling like salt and beef, your feet aching, and your paycheck due the following Friday. You didn't need to invent anything. You didn't need to impress. You just had to keep the system moving. Most customers never thought about the workers. They saw speed, consistency, a clean counter, and a familiar bag. But behind that counter was a team of teenagers, working in close quarters, barely speaking, moving with quick hands and focused eyes. You learned to read your coworkers' movements. If someone grabbed the buns, you moved to the sauce. If someone stepped back from the fryer, you stepped in to salt. It wasn't teamwork exactly, but it was coordination. That sometimes the only words exchanged during an entire rush were, "Next. 2 cheeseburgers, fries up, order ready." And then there were the quiet hours, the moments just after lunch or before the dinner rush, the hum of the machines, the clink of metal on stainless steel, the low sound of shoes on tile. You'd find yourself wiping the same counter 3 times just to stay moving. It wasn't hard work, exactly, but it was tight. You had to be alert. You had to be clean. You had to be fast. And above all else, you had to follow the system. For some workers, that kind of order was calming. It made the world feel manageable, small. You knew where to be. You knew what to do. But for others, it felt mechanical. You weren't really learning how to cook. You weren't interacting with the food. You weren't being taught how to run a business. You were being taught how to perform, and every performance had rules. Some stores, especially in the suburbs, had stricter expectations. Managers were trained to monitor body language. If you looked tired, you might be pulled aside. If you didn't smile enough at the front counter, you might get scheduled less the following week. Complaints from customers, even minor ones, were taken seriously. You weren't fired for being lazy. You were simply erased from the schedule. Still, for a lot of workers, the job had its rewards. You got your first paycheck. You bought your first radio, your first bike, maybe even saved for your first used car. And there was something deeply satisfying about completing a shift, filling orders, moving fast, seeing a long line of customers leave happy. For a job that expected silence and repetition, it offered a sense of accomplishment. You didn't have to be the best, you just had to last. And if you did, if you showed up on time, wore your uniform clean, followed the procedures, you might get promoted to closer. That meant you stayed late, locked the doors, cleaned the fryers, and reset the kitchen for the next morning. It wasn't glamorous. It paid a little more, but it meant you were trusted, and in a place built on timing and trust. That was everything. By the mid-1960s, McDonald's had found its rhythm. The company now had more than 600 locations across the United States. And while the outside world was changing, civil rights protests, the Beatles on the radio, a war looming in Vietnam, the inside of a McDonald's was eerily constant. Walk into one in Kansas, Ohio, or California, and it would smell the same. The menu would look the same. The burger would taste the same. And to make that happen behind the counter, something had to change. The system needed better managers at first. Store management was simple. 1 or 2 older employees, usually men, often ex-military or former retail clerks, were promoted to supervise the younger staff. Their job was to maintain order, check the inventory, make the schedules, and keep the line moving. But as McDonald's kept expanding, it wasn't enough to have a strong presence at the front counter. Managers needed to think like miniature franchisees, and so McDonald's created something new: formal manager training. It started small binder-based instruction, flowcharts, and routine checklists, but it quickly expanded. Managers were taught to monitor every part of store operation: labor costs, food waste, customer feedback, cleanliness scores, and product timing. They weren't just watching you cook burgers, they were tracking how many burgers you cooked, how long you took, and how often you ran out of buns before restocking. If you worked under one of these new managers in 1964, you probably noticed the shift. You were still expected to follow the system, but now the system was being measured more closely. Timers were checked more often. Trash bins were inspected. A mop left leaning in the wrong corner might earn the whole shift a warning. Condiment stations were wiped twice as often. Even your attitude was quietly assessed. One manager might compliment you for wiping the counter twice. Another might dock your hours for standing still. Too long, nothing was written down, but everything was being watched. Managers also began to develop their own styles. Some were encouraging quietly, teaching, coaching, backing up the team when the fryer overflowed or a customer yelled over cold fries. Others, cold, strict, eyes like stopwatches. You could tell when they were on shift. Voices lowered, movements got sharper, smiles got stiffer. They didn't yell. They didn't have to. All they had to do was schedule you less. This new layer of oversight meant one thing for workers: every shift was a test. You weren't just judged by the food, you were judged by the way you moved, how clean your apron was, how crisp your bag folds looked, whether your shirt was tucked in by the second bell. In some stores, performance ratings became formal. A whiteboard in the back listed Employee of the Week. Stars were given for punctuality. Demotions came in the form of fewer hours or worse stations. Some workers thrived under this pressure. They liked the rules. They liked knowing exactly what to do. For those who followed every instruction, hit their marks, and stayed quiet, they were often promoted to crew leader, a soft title that usually came with a little extra responsibility, but no extra pay. But it meant something. It meant the manager trusted you to train new hires, check fry timers, and handle the register during a rush. You weren't just part of the machine. You were helping to run it. Still, the cracks were showing. Workers who wanted more flexibility, who didn't like being told how to stand or how many seconds to greet a customer, left quickly. Some stores cycled through dozens of workers a year. Others relied on a handful of consistent employees who carried the weight of the team. And then there were the stores where managers tried too hard to impress corporate. Those stores were tense, clean to the point of sterility. Every sound monitored. Every smile rehearsed. If you worked in one of those stores in 1965, you knew one wrong move and you were off the schedule. But, in spite of it all, the job still held its place in the culture. For teenagers, it was a rite of passage. For parents, it was a safe place for their kids to learn responsibility. For managers, it was the first rung on the corporate ladder. McDonald's was no longer just a job. It was becoming an institution, and every shift you clocked in, you helped build it. From the outside, McDonald's looked like the future. Bright lights, gleaming counters, familiar menus, a system that worked and looked effortless doing it. But behind the counter, between the fryer baskets and the warming trays, something more human was always simmering. Camaraderie, coping, and sometimes quiet acts of rebellion. By 1965, most stores were running full schedules, early morning prep shifts, midday rushes, late night closings. The crews were mostly young high schoolers, recent grads, a few older part-timers with families or second jobs. And even though the system demanded speed and silence, something strange started to happen over time. The workers began to bond. It happened in the margins. A shared glance during a brutal rush when the fryer timer beeped and the line was out the door. A whispered joke while stacking cups in the back room. A quick "you okay?" after a manager's correction hit too hard. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it mattered because working at McDonald's in the mid-60s wasn't just about flipping burgers. It was about enduring. Every worker had their own way of making it through the shift. Some moved fast, never stopping, never speaking, a blur of muscle memory. Others found small moments of stillness, folding wrappers extra carefully, wiping the counter twice instead of once, slowing their breath between orders. A few made the job fun in quiet ways, singing under their breath when the manager was out of sight, drawing faces in ketchup dots on the prep table, then wiping them off immediately, timing the perfect flip so the patty landed exactly center on the bun. Tiny rebellions, never loud, never rule-breaking, just reminders that they were still human in a system that sometimes forgot. Friendships formed in the break room, not big, sweeping friendships, but small, dependable ones. You'd share a soda with someone you barely knew 2 weeks ago, and by the next month, they were saving you a seat. You'd trade shift stories, bad customers, burnt fries, which manager had a good mood that day, and sometimes you'd look up at the schedule on the wall and feel relief. You were on shift with people who got it, who didn't complain, who covered for you when the shake machine overflowed, who moved in rhythm with you. There were no celebrations, no awards, but for that one shift, you weren't just part of the machine. You were a team. But not every store had that. Some stores were cold, detached. New hires came and went. Managers cycled in. Rules felt tighter, breaks shorter. In those stores, workers stuck to themselves, eyes down, heads low. If you asked them how they felt about the job, they'd shrug. Its work could be worse. Pays better than mowing lawns. And that was the thing. For all its strictness, for all the timers, rules, and repetition, working at McDonald's still offered something many jobs didn't. Predictability. The hours were consistent, the tasks clear, the expectations sometimes exhausting, but never confusing. And in a world growing more chaotic outside, civil unrest, war headlines, cultural revolutions, there was something oddly comforting about the sameness of a shift. Every burger looked the same. Every bag was folded the same. Every night, the mop hit the same floor tiles in the same order before close. It wasn't exciting, but it was steady. Still, the system was tightening. New stores meant new expectations. Franchise owners wanted higher throughput, more customers, more speed. Corporate began distributing charts and tips on how to shave seconds off order time. And so, every moment of stillness, every sip of soda, every whispered joke became even more valuable. Because in those moments, you remembered, this wasn't just a system, it was a place filled with people, moving fast, staying quiet, but always watching out for one another. By 1966, the golden arches were no longer just restaurant signage. They were a symbol, visible from highways, glowing above strip malls and suburban streets. They stood for something bigger than burgers, bigger than fries. They stood for America's version of progress, fast, predictable, clean. The McDonald's brand was now a household name. Families trusted it. Teenagers recognized it. Children pointed to the arches with excitement. But inside the restaurant beneath, that neon promise the workers behind the counter lived a far different reality. One of pressure, of repetition, of quiet, invisible labor, and yet, something else, to pride. Workers began to notice a shift in how the public saw them. If you wore the uniform outside the store walking to the bus, grabbing a soda at the corner store, people knew what it meant. Oh, you work at McDonald's? Must be a clean place. My nephew just got hired there, too. There was a certain dignity in the job now. Even if the pay hadn't changed much, you were part of something familiar, predictable, respected, especially in communities where not many jobs offered structure or upward mobility. But that respect didn't make the job easier. If anything, it raised the stakes. The more successful McDonald's became, the more pressure trickled down to the workers. Stores were expected to serve more customers. Orders were timed. Efficiency became religion. A typical shift now meant frying and salting dozens of baskets per hour, stacking hundreds of burgers in perfect formation, wiping the counter every 5 minutes whether it was dirty or not, rotating condiments, checking dates, filling napkin dispensers, dealing with lines that seemed endless on weekends and Friday nights, and through all of it, you had to smile, be polite, work faster than yesterday. Managers received updated materials from corporate printout, instructional pamphlets, even slide decks to help them increase productivity. Charts on how to reduce wait time, tips for motivating teenage staff, recommended disciplinary language. If you were a crew member in 1966, you probably didn't see these directly, but you felt them. You felt it when your break was cut short to prep early for a school sports rush. You felt it when your manager retimed the burger station and expected better numbers. You felt it when someone from corporate dropped by and the whole store went silent with tension. But for all the pressure, there was also a growing pride among workers, especially among those who stuck with it more than a few months. If you worked at McDonald's for a full year, that meant something. It meant you could handle the heat, the repetition, the surprise rushes, the strict managers, the fry burns and sore arches and cracked thumbs from folding wrappers 1,000 times a week. And for many workers, especially teens and young adults, it meant your first taste of being good at something. By now, many stores had internal recognition systems, top performer boards, stars on name tags, crew members of the month. Small rewards, maybe a bonus or an extra shift of your choosing, but mostly just a laminated piece of paper, maybe your name in dry erase marker, maybe a nod from the manager at the end of a long Friday shift. And that was enough for some. Because when the job is that physically draining, being seen at all can mean everything. There was also a growing culture of veteran crew members. These were the ones who knew every station, who could jump from the fryer to the register without missing a beat, who prepped lettuce before you even realized it was low. They weren't managers, but they were respected. Everyone moved a little faster when they were on shift. If you were new, they might train you. Not officially, just little things, like how to twist the fry basket just right to avoid a splash, or how to fold a burger wrap faster using one hand while grabbing a new bun with the other. In a job where everything was mechanical, they were mentors in the art of survival. The public still didn't see any of this. They didn't see the grease-soaked paper towel you used to grip the fryer handle. They didn't hear the hiss of the grill or the beep of the heat lamp timer every 3 minutes. They didn't feel the sting of salt on open cuts, or the sticky floors from spilled syrup, or the ache in your shoulder after a double shift. They saw a smile, a bag, a burger. They got what they wanted, and that meant the system was working. Of course, it didn't always work perfectly. Machines broke. Deliveries came late. Co-workers called out. Customers got angry. And when that happened, it was you, not the corporate suits or the brand mascot, who had to fix it. You mopped up spilled milkshake mix before the manager saw it. You apologized to the yelling father whose fries were cold. You restocked ketchup packets in the middle of a 5-deep line. You stayed 20 minutes late because someone left the walk-in freezer unlocked and the inventory sheet had to be redone. No overtime, no bonus, just part of the job. And yet, you came back, not because you loved it, not because it paid well, but because, in a strange way, it made sense. There were rules. There was a beginning, middle, and end to every shift. And at the end of the week, there was a folded envelope with your name on it, and just enough money to matter. You could save, you could contribute. You could buy something small that felt earned. For some workers, McDonald's was just a stepping stone. A few months, maybe a year, and then you moved on to trade work, to school, to the military, to better paying retail jobs. But for others, it was the first place they felt capable. Not just capable of working, but capable of improving, of handling pressure, of doing something difficult and doing it well. And even if no one saw it, if the customers never said thank you, if the managers never noticed, it mattered to you, because you saw it in yourself. Not every shift at McDonald's felt like a well-oiled system. There were days when the rhythm broke down, days when everything went wrong. No matter how carefully you followed the rules, the meat wouldn't cook evenly, the fryer would cut off mid-basket, a co-worker wouldn't show, or worse, a manager would, and they'd be in one of those moods. And, on those days, being a worker behind the counter meant one thing above all else: enduring. The average customer never saw it. They pulled up to the window or walked to the counter expecting speed, smiles, and familiar food. They didn't see the grill backed up with patties that stuck because someone didn't clean the flat top in time. They didn't see the ice machine overflowing, or the syrup line to the soda machine sputtering out foam. They didn't see the chaos in the back when the bun tray collapsed and 40 fresh buns hit the floor. Just minutes before the dinner rush, they saw a clean bag, a smiling face, and the fries they expected. But you were the one who made that happen. Even on the worst shifts, store closings were the hardest part of the day, especially when the shift had been long or rough. The floors were sticky, the air felt humid from fryer grease, and your shirt was stiff with salt and sweat. You'd lock the front doors, flip the switch on the neon sign, and then the real work started. Every machine had to be shut down and wiped. The grill scrubbed sometimes with steel wool, the fryer filtered and cleaned out with tools that never quite worked right. All the trash taken out, the dining area swept and mopped. The bathrooms always last had to be cleaned, no matter how tired you were, and it wasn't quick. A closing shift could add another hour, maybe 2, to your night. You didn't get paid extra, just the same hourly wage, minute by minute. But you stayed, because if you left a mess for the morning crew, you'd hear about it. On bad days, time moved differently. Minutes slowed, tasks dragged. Every beep from the timer felt sharper, every order up more irritating. You could feel it in your shoulders, your feet, your jaw, and sometimes something inside would crack just a little. You'd snap at a coworker, drop the salt shaker, forget the pickles again, zone out at the counter when a customer was waiting, and then the manager would notice, and the correction would come. Not harsh, but enough to sting. Focus. You've done this 100 times. Don't let it slide. There was no room in the system for burnout. You weren't supposed to feel tired. You weren't supposed to get bored. You weren't supposed to question why every day felt the same. Because McDonald's wasn't built to reward individuality. It was built to reward consistency. And when you didn't feel consistent, the system didn't stop for you. Some workers coped by going silent. They'd show up, clock in, and barely say a word, just move through the motions like ghosts. Flip, wrap, drop, salt, bag, repeat. Others cracked jokes, kept things light, tried to bring some air into the tight space behind the counter, and some just left. One day, they wouldn't show up. You'd see their name on the schedule, but when 4 o'clock came, no one walked through the back door. Sometimes they called, sometimes they didn't, and the shift went on without them. But then there were the resilient ones, the closers who came in early, the fryer kings who could drop basket after basket without burning a batch. The quiet ones who didn't need praise, they just showed up every day, on time. They weren't celebrated, but they were remembered. Managers relied on them. New hires copied them. Co-workers relaxed when they were on the same shift. They weren't just surviving. They were keeping the store alive. Sometimes you'd finish a particularly bad night and walk home in silence. The air would be cool. Your uniform would stick to your back. You'd reach into your pocket and feel the stub of your punch card, still warm from the time clock. You hadn't changed the world, but you had made it through, and tomorrow you'd come back. Not because you had to, but because you knew you could. When most people think about McDonald's in the 1960s, they remember the golden arches, the crisp red and white tile, the metal-rimmed windows, the glowing signage inviting you in. But if you were a worker, the space you knew best wasn't the parking lot or the front counter. It was the kitchen, a narrow strip of hot steel, cold tile, clattering trays, and grease-polished machinery. Your whole shift took place in less than 100 square feet. And in that space, everything was designed to maximize speed. The layout dictated your every move. Each station was locked in place. The grill was front and center, big, flat, divided into zones with exact temperatures. Next to it sat the warming tray, under heat lamps, always filled and rotated. The bun station was often a single shelf on wheels, holding 3 dozen buns at a time, pre-sliced and soft. The fry station, off to the side, near a drain, where baskets hissed with oil and filters hummed quietly underfoot. And the shake machine, if you were lucky. One of the newer multi-mixers buzzed behind the register. The room wasn't built for comfort. It was built for efficiency. Every surface wiped clean. Every step counted. Every inch mattered. If you were one of the workers manning the grill, your zone was just a few feet wide. You didn't step left or right unless necessary. Burgers were cooked in batches of 6 to 8, flipped in perfect time. A plastic timer with a buzzing bell sat to your left. You didn't use your ears as much as your wrists. That familiar motion of flip, check, wrap. Even a step too far in either direction could block someone else's path. And if that happened during a rush, you'd hear about it immediately. The kitchen was like a game of choreography, but one where no one spoke. You learned to sense where your co-workers were. You learned to slide sideways between counters, pivot while holding a tray, press the burger wrapper with just the right speed so it folded neatly into thirds without slowing you down. If you were new, the space felt tight, awkward. You bumped into people. You forgot where things were. You overreached and knocked over the pickles. But over time, your body adapted. You developed a kind of spatial instinct, silent, invisible awareness of the kitchen's flow. Storage space was minimal. Everything had its place, but nothing stayed in it for long. Lettuce bins went under the prep table with "and always" dripping. Pickles lived in a plastic tub in the fridge, submerged in brine. Patties were stacked on paper, thawed carefully so they didn't stick. Paper bags were lined up vertically for fast-grabbing. Fry boxes were assembled in advance and nested inside each other. There was barely room to turn around. If two people opened fridge drawers at the same time, one had to back away. There were no wide aisles, no personal space, just motion, timing, focus. Heat was constant. The grill radiated it. The fryer radiated it. The lighting fluorescent and cold offered no relief. Air conditioning, if it existed, barely reached the kitchen. Sweat gathered quickly behind your collar. Paper hats softened. Foreheads shined. Aprons stuck to your back. On hot days, the kitchen felt like a steam chamber. On cold days, only the walk-in freezer offered a breakhand that was never where you wanted to linger. You didn't sit. There were no stools. Breaks happened only when the manager decided they were possible. But in all that constraint, there was order. You knew your path. You knew your rhythm. You walked in the same steps every shift, pivoted at the same places. You reached without looking. You wiped without thinking. There was a strange kind of muscle memory that developed in those conditions, and for workers who lasted, that rhythm was grounding. Closing time revealed the space at its worst. The walls, clean from the customer's point of view, were splattered in grease. The space between the fryer and the back counter hid sticky residue from dozens of spills under the shake machine. Always syrup, always sticky. The grill took the longest, scraped with a flat metal blade, then wiped with cloth, then oiled down for the next morning. You'd mop twice, sometimes 3 times. The mop water turned brown before you made it halfway. The size of the space meant you knew your co-workers intimately. You knew who worked with loud steps, who swayed slightly while prepping burgers, who chewed gum when the manager wasn't looking, who cursed quietly under their breath when the fryer buzzed at the wrong time. You saw people at their best, on nights when the system ran smooth, and at their worst end nights when everything broke down. Sometimes a co-worker would lean against the wall just for one breath, just 10 seconds, and in that moment you felt it, the weight of working inside a space that never stopped asking for more. The physical design shaped the emotional landscape. There was no room to express frustration, no space to vent, no way to slow down without blocking someone else's path. So emotions built up in the smallest ways: a tighter grip on the spatula, shorter word to a coworker, I sigh between batches, longer silence during cleanup who had to release. Those feelings outside the building on the walk home, during the bus ride, or not at all, because inside, everything was efficiency, and yet workers made the space their own, a marker hidden behind the syrup pump where someone had drawn a smiley face, a favorite rag you always used at the fry station, a prep drawer you cleaned more than you had to, just to feel like something was in your control, a laminated good job sticker stuck behind the bun rack, long forgotten but never removed. The kitchen was a box, a machine, but it was also a shared world, and for the workers who stood in it day after day, shoulder to shoulder, which was a world they navigated with quiet resilience. If you stood in line at a McDonald's in the late 1960s, You might not think much about who was handing you your bag of food. The workers behind the counter wore the same uniform, moved with the same rhythm, and served with the same practiced smile. But if you looked closely shift after shift, store after store, you'd begin to notice a pattern. Boys on the grill, girls at the front counter. Boys dropping fries, girls pouring shakes, boys closing, girls smiling. It wasn't written in the handbook, it wasn't posted on the wall, but inside the store, it was understood. In the earliest years, most McDonald's workers were male. When the system was still new, especially in the 1950s and early 60s, the labor was seen as hard, fast, and technical. You needed to move quickly, lift heavy items, clean grease, and work long, late hours. As the system matured and locations opened closer to schools and neighborhoods, more female workers were hired, especially in suburban areas. But even then, where they worked and how they worked followed quiet rules. You could tell by the way a manager handed out stations. A new boy, straight to the grill or fryers. A new girl, usually the front register or the shake machine, opening prep. Men. Cash, counting at close. Women, trash runs. Boys, wiping tables. Often girls. No one said it out loud, but everyone saw it. The uniforms reflected it. 2. For male workers, crisp white button-ups, paper hats folded into tight triangles, black pants, polished shoes. For female workers, depending on the region and year, button-up blouses, often with short sleeves, modest skirts, sometimes later replaced with slacks, a soft cap or visor, later evolving into hairnets or branded headwear. Makeup, subtly encouraged, never required but always noticed. There was an expectation of presentation. For men, it was polish and posture. For women, it was cheerfulness, cleanness, and being pleasant. A clean smile, a light voice, a calm demeanor even when the customer wasn't so calm themselves. In some stores, especially in the Midwest and South, managers made assignments based on how a girl looked. Too quiet, shake station, confident, cash register, pretty smile, front counter. Too serious, stock duty. Again nothing said, just done. And if you were a female worker, you knew it. You felt it when you were passed over for the fryer again. You felt it when you were told, "We'll keep you up front, customers like you." Still, many young women found a certain freedom in the job. It was structured, predictable. You didn't have to be charming, you just had to be fast. You didn't have to be attractive, you just had to be clean. And in a time when job options were limited for teenage girls, McDonald's offered something rare, a paycheck, a routine, a public role that wasn't tied to domestic work or babysitting. You could put on your uniform, walk to work, and say, "I have a shift today," that meant something, even if it was for 50 cents an hour. Some female workers took pride in outperforming the boys, moving faster at the register, cleaning faster, memorizing more order codes, taking double shifts without complaining. It was a quiet kind of competition, no scoreboard, but plenty of scorekeeping. They remembered who got praise, who got extra hours, who got promoted to crew leader, even unofficially. And when it wasn't them, they noticed friendships often formed along gender lines, especially in larger stores. The boys stuck to the back grill, fry, mop duty. The girls up front counter, prep, shake. During breaks, tables sometimes split, naturally. It wasn't tense, it wasn't hostile. It was just how things fell. But in some cases, those lines blurred. Two closes, one boy, one girl, cleaning quietly, together after a long Friday night, shared jokes in the back while slicing onions, helping each other stock the freezer before close, because in the end, Greece didn't care who you were, and when the fryer caught fire or the ice machine backed up, you worked together. Fast, no questions. Management roles were still male-dominated. Nearly all store managers in the 60s were men. Some were in their 20s, others pushing 40. Many had backgrounds in the military or sales. A few had climbed up from crew member to assistant manager. Women were occasionally promoted to shift lead, usually in more progressive or urban locations. But even then, it was rare to see a woman giving orders behind the counter. Less it was about napkins, prep trays, or dress code. If a customer got angry, the girl behind the counter called for the manager, and when he arrived, he'd often apologize on her behalf, even if she wasn't wrong. Still, inside the quiet rituals of the job, everyone was doing the same work, cleaning up spills before anyone slipped, folding wrappers with practiced ease, memorizing orders, even without the printed tickers, smiling when they didn't feel like smiling. It didn't matter whether you wore a paper hat or a visor. By 7 o'clock on a busy Friday night, the kitchen didn't care. Everyone moved, everyone sweated, everyone kept the system going, and when the night ended, you all clocked out the same way, with sore feet, salt on your forearms, and the slow relief of quiet after hours of noise. For female workers, McDonald's wasn't always fair, but it was a place where they could earn their own money, master a routine, and exist outside of the roles they were expected to play at home or school. And for the girls who stayed longer than a summer, who learned every station, and who never flinched during the rush, the quiet hierarchy started to notice. Maybe not with a promotion, but with respect, and sometimes in a place that ran on silence and repetition. That respect was the loudest thing you'd hear all shift. It started the way first jobs always do. A friend said they were hiring, or you walked past the sign in the window, or your mum heard from someone at church that the manager liked young workers with good posture. You filled out a form, maybe shook a hand, and by the next week, you were standing behind the counter, paper hat folded tight, apron tied at the waist, learning how to use the register or line up buns on a tray without dropping any dot. It wasn't glamorous, but it was yours, your first job. For thousands of young Americans in the late 1960s, that job was McDonald's. It didn't require a resume. It didn't demand experience. It didn't expect you to know much, only that you'd show up on time, listen closely, and move fast when the line got long. And in return, it gave something many young people had never had before: structure. You learned how to clock in, how to prep for the shift, how to stand, how to speak clearly and keep your voice even when you were tired or irritated or hungry or overwhelmed. It wasn't school, it wasn't home, it was a third space, and it came with expectations. Time moved differently at McDonald's. Each shift had a rhythm: prep in the early hours, slicing onions, counting patties, wiping trays, rush between 11:30 and 1:30, orders flying in, every second counting, slow stretches in the mid-afternoon, refilling, scrubbing, folding napkins, and the quiet intensity of closing, cleaning everything to exact standards. Even outside work, your mind started to follow the pattern. You found yourself calculating how long things would take, timing how fast you could get home, shower, and change clothes, planning errands based on delivery windows and fry cycles. McDonald's taught you how to see time as a tool, and once you'd learned that, you didn't forget it. The job also taught you responsibility, not in theory, but minute by minute. If you forgot to restock buns, the grills slowed down. If you didn't clean the shake mixer, it gummed up during rush. If you cut corners on prep, your coworkers suffered for it hours later. There was no grade, no applause, just quiet accountability. And once you realized how much your work affected others, it changed how you saw every task. That was how the job got under your skin, not through grand lessons, but through repetition. You started to notice other things too. Who cleaned properly, who rushed and skipped steps, who took too long on breaks, who showed up late, hungover, or angry, and who picked up the slack. You learned how to read people. You didn't need to like them. You just needed to predict them. You learned how to adjust your pace, how to cover quietly for someone struggling, how to calm a customer without over-apologizing, how to hold your ground respectfully when someone tried to push you past it. That kind of social intelligence wasn't listed on the job description, but it was something the best workers learned fast. And then there was the uniform. The first time you put it on, it felt like a costume. Strange, stiff, impersonal. But by the second or third week, it started to mean something. You noticed yourself ironing it more carefully, wiping your shoes before walking to the bus stop, tucking your shirt in with a kind of practiced quiet. Not because someone told you to, but because you were starting to own it. Not just the fabric, or the hat, or the name tag, the role. You knew how to move. You knew what to do. You were part of something bigger than yourself, and you knew how to carry your part of it. McDonald's didn't just teach work, it taught control. How to control your breath during rushes, how to control your body through long, aching shifts, how to control your mouth when a customer said something rude, how to control your emotions when your manager corrected you in front of others. There was a kind of quiet strength to it, the ability to keep moving when your hands were sore, when your back ached, when your patience was fraying. It wasn't the kind of strength people saw, but it was real, and it stayed with you. There were workers who hated it, of course, who watched the clock from the minute they arrived, who felt trapped, undervalued, exhausted, and they weren't wrong. The job could be unforgiving, underpaid, undervalued, invisible, but even those workers, in their own way, learned something. How to survive in a system, how to move efficiently through something boring, how to compartmentalize, how to keep your dignity in a space that didn't always see it. And for others, the ones who found something in the rhythm, who got promoted to crew leader, who stayed long enough to train the new hires, it meant something more. It became the foundation of how they worked in every job after. They showed up on time, they stood straighter, they moved quicker, they remembered how to polish, to count, to prep, to greet. Some didn't even realize they'd been changed. Not until years later, when they were managing others, or running a small business, or fixing someone's mistake in silence, and remembered how they once restocked a ketchup bin without being asked. Because that's what the system had taught them, to do it right, to do it clean, to do it without needing credit. And that was the strange, quiet legacy of McDonald's as a first job. It didn't inspire, it didn't motivate, it didn't give you dreams, but it gave you tools. Tools you couldn't unlearn. Tools you'd carry with you in offices, in workshops, in kitchens, in schools. Because long after the grease smell faded from your clothes, long after the paper hat was folded and forgotten, you still remembered what it felt like to show up, to perform, to keep going, to do your job. And in a world that didn't always reward consistency, that was something. Something solid, something yours. If you only looked at the manuals, if you only watched the ads, if you only read the corporate memos sent out from Oak Brook, Illinois, you'd think McDonald's was a perfect machine, a frictionless process, a controlled environment, no room for emotion, fatigue, or personality. But anyone who worked a shift knew the truth. The system was real, the rules were rigid, but inside that structure, there was laughter, there was connection, there was joy. Not loud, not chaotic, but woven into the rhythm. You just had to be paying attention. It didn't happen all at once. When you first started, everything was tense. You were focused on the rules, on speed, on not messing up the grill timing or forgetting to log the inventory sheet. You were inside your head constantly. But over time, once you knew the steps by heart, something shifted. You began to notice the space between the seconds, the brief glances between co-workers, the subtle humor in the way a manager repeated himself, the inside jokes about customers who always ordered one of everything, the strange satisfaction of getting through an entire lunch rush with no order mistakes. It was in those moments that the job softened, that you stopped feeling like just a part in a machine and started feeling like part of a team. Some days it was just one good thing, a perfect flip at the grill that landed the patty exactly where it needed to go. A shared smile when a customer said "God bless you, kid" after you replaced a spilled shake without charging. Getting your drawer count exactly right on the first try. Someone complimenting your speed behind the counter when they didn't have to. No cheers, no gold stars, but you felt it. You felt it when the shift ended, and you were tired but not defeated. You'd look around the kitchen and think, we did that. There were moments of flow, too. Those rare shifts when everything just worked. The grill man had the patties timed perfectly. The fry station was fully stocked. The front counter was calm, even in the rush, and the orders came in, went out, and you felt like you were floating. No thinking, no pausing, just pure motion, pure rhythm. You didn't talk much on those shifts. You didn't need to. Everyone was moving in sync. Everyone was reading each other, and when the rush ended and the store went quiet again, you'd look up sweaty, exhausted, smiling and realize that was actually kind of fun. Even the jokes had their place. Quiet ones, of course. You'd never laugh loud or break character at the front. But in the prep area, behind the bun rack, near the mop sink, there was room to breathe. Someone pretending to take a customer's absurd order backstage. "Yes ma'am, 1 triple pickle, no bun cheese and hamburger coming up." Drawing a face with ketchup dots on the tray liner and wiping it away before it got caught. A co-worker holding up a paper hat like a crown and announcing, "Behold, the Fry King of Section 3. No one taught you how to do that. But everyone learned how eventually, because the only way to survive inside a place that demanded speed and silence was to carve out moments of joy between the rushes. Some managers were in on it, too, the good ones, anyway. They didn't laugh openly, but they didn't scold either. They let you have your moment, let you recover after a bad customer, let you catch your breath before jumping back in. And when a shift went well, when everyone hit their marks, they noticed they didn't give long speeches, but they said things like, "Good pace today, clean clothes, thanks for not making me yell." And in a place where silence was normal, that was high praise. You also felt it in how the team protected each other. A new hire freezing up during a rush, You'd quietly cover their register. Someone cut their hand on the shake machine. You'd clean their station without being asked. Manager in a bad mood. The crew would move faster, smoother, trying to prevent an outburst that no one deserved. It wasn't heroism. It was quiet empathy. The kind that happens when you've worked 6 inches from someone for months. When you've handed them spatulas, refilled their napkin bins, whispered, "You okay?" when they looked off. And sometimes, the joy was in the tiny wins, finding a fry scoop that wasn't cracked, getting the shake mix to the exact consistency, cleaning the grill to a mirror shine in record time, having the closing playlist, usually a local radio station, through the scratchy back speaker play a song you actually liked. You DB mopping, tired, and the song would come on. You didn't say anything, but you might mouth the words, and your co-worker might smile, just for a second. Some workers stayed because of these moments. They didn't love the job, but they loved the feeling of competence, of being part of a process that they could master, of having a place to go where they were needed. And when people said, "It's just fast food," they didn't argue, but inside, they knew better. They knew that it took skill to handle the lunch rush, that it took patience to clean properly, that it took character to keep your cool when the system broke down, and most of all, that it took quiet pride to do it. Well, not everyone got that, but the workers did. They felt it in their bones, in their wrists, in their shoes, in their paper hats, folded and sweat soft from hours of motion. They felt it on the walk home, when the air finally cooled their skin. They felt it when they dropped into bed, shoes still on. They felt it when they returned the next day, and picked up right where they left off. Because the machine might have been cold, but the people inside it were anything but. By 1969, McDonald's had become a national symbol. Over 1,000 locations, television ads in every major market. Ray Kroc had taken the company public just a few years earlier, and investors were thrilled. The system was efficient, the product consistent, the money flowing. But behind the counter, if you asked a worker how they felt, their answer might be less certain, because by then, something had settled in beneath the rhythm and pride and quiet camaraderie. Something duller, heavier, a kind of emotional monotony. Not every shift was hard, but a lot of them felt the same motions, same words, same orders, same smells, same songs on the break room radio, same salt patterns on your apron. No matter how many times you washed it, you'd walk in, tie your apron, and feel the sameness wrap around you like a damp coat. And some days, that was fine. You went numb, you moved quickly, you watched the clock. But other days, it got to you. There's a particular kind of tired that comes from being invisible while working in plain sight. The customers saw you, but they didn't see you. They saw your hands pass them a tray. They saw your mouth say, "Enjoy your meal." They saw your legs as they walked around you while you cleaned the floor, but not your name, not your story, not the fact that you were on your second double this week, or that your mum was sick, or that your shoes were cracked from too many closings to them. You were just another paper hat, replaceable, predictable, part of the wallpaper. Some customers were kind. They smiled. They thanked you. Some even asked how your day was. But most, they didn't make eye contact. They spoke quickly, distracted. They barked orders, checked watches, sighed when something took longer than 30 seconds. And, while you knew not to take it personally, some days it wore you down anyway. You'd look at your reflection in the shake machine tired eyes. hat askew, aprons streaked with ketchup and wonder. What am I doing here? Even among co-workers, things could feel disconnected. Some workers moved through shifts like ghosts. No conversation, no eye contact. Just bag, wrap, press, beep, bat. Managers didn't always help either. Some were fair and firm, others snapped, micromanaged, took stress out on the crew, corrected your every move in front of others, cut your break short, then forgot to clock it. You learned to stay quiet. You learned to shrink. You learned how to survive a shift without showing frustration. There were moments when the system broke trust with you. A promised raise that never came. A shift cancelled last-minute. Hours cut because a newer caper worker had just been hired. A manager taking credit for something you did right. A uniform order that never arrived, leaving you with only one shirt to rotate all week. These weren't big betrayals, but they added up, and the message was clear. The system runs with or without you. Some workers responded by going quiet. They stopped trying to impress, stopped asking for better hours, stopped speaking unless spoken to. They still moved quickly, still did the job, still hit every mark, but inside, they were already gone, counting down days until a new job, counting down paychecks until graduation, counting down shifts until they could quit, and when they did leave, no farewell, just a crossed-out name on the next week's schedule. Others stayed longer, not because they loved it, but because they had no better option. Maybe it was a second job. Maybe they were helping their family. Maybe they were too tired to start somewhere new. These were the quiet veterans. They knew everything, trained everyone, fixed mistakes without being asked, endured whatever came their way. But you could see the fatigue in their faces, in the way they avoided eye contact, in how they stood during their break, never sitting, never relaxing, in how they always looked half-packed, like they were ready to leave but didn't know where to go. Still, they showed up, even on bad days, even when the fryer oil stung their arms, even when no one said thank you, because there was still pride, buried deep. Pride in getting the timing just right. Pride in handing over a perfect bag in under 60 seconds. Pride in covering for a new hire who couldn't keep up. Pride in knowing the store wouldn't run as well without you. It wasn't loud. Pride. It wasn't rewarded. But it kept you moving. And that's the truth about working at McDonald's in the late 60s. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't abusive. It wasn't tragic. It was quietly exhausting. It asked for everything and offered little in return. It made you invisible in plain sight. It pushed you to move like a machine and expected you to be grateful for the opportunity. And somehow, through all of that, you still came back. Because bills needed paying, because quitting would be harder, because part of you still believed that if you kept showing up, it might all mean something, even if no one ever said so. When you worked at McDonald's in the late 1960s, the job didn't stay in the building. It followed you, not in obvious ways, not like a uniform still on your back or a paycheck sticking out of your pocket, but in smaller, quieter ways. In how you walked, how you thought, how you spent your time, your money, your energy. Once you put on the paper hat, you didn't just become a worker. You became two people. The one who took orders, counted change, scrubbed fryers, and the one who went home. For younger workers, high schoolers, and recent graduates, the split could be jarring. In school, you were a student. a name on a roll sheet, a member of a team, a kid with homework, sports, or chores at work. You were a cog, a number on the schedule, a uniform, a person whose breaks were tracked to the minute. And when you left work and went back to your real life, family dinners, classroom seats, movie nights, you felt different. Not older, not smarter. Just worn, like something had quietly changed. You noticed it in the little sacrifices. How you skipped hanging out after school because you had a shift. How you stopped joining clubs or going to practice. How you learned to nap in small windows between school and work, or work and dinner, and how, gradually, your priorities shifted. You thought less about grades and more about your next paycheck, less about tests and more about tips for folding wrappers faster, less about what you wanted to be someday and more about getting through today. Not because you gave up, but because McDonald's taught you that time was limited and you learned to spend it carefully. The job also changed how you saw other people. You could spot the kids who'd never had a job, the ones who talked big, moved slow, complained loudly. You didn't judge them. Not really, but you felt something shift inside when they made a mess in the dining room and left it for someone else. You wanted to say, someone like me has to clean that up. But you didn't. You just picked it up quietly if they left it behind. Because that's what the job had taught you. Work first, talk later. For some, the job affected relationships. Friends got impatient when you couldn't hang out. Family asked why you were always tired. Teachers scolded you for dozing in class or missing homework. But the job kept asking for more, and at a certain point, you stopped explaining. You let people misunderstand, let them think you were lazy, distracted, forgetful. Because explaining how exhausting a shift was, how it drained you mentally, emotionally, physically, never quite worked. Unless someone had done the job, they just didn't get it. And then, there were the nights you brought it home, the smell, grease in your hair, even after a shower, salt lines on your shoes, calluses on your fingers from bagging 300 burgers in a day. You'd collapse into bed, stare at the ceiling, and still hear the timer beeping in your head. Sometimes you dreamed in the cadence of the shift. Order up. Next customer, please. Wipe that down. Don't forget the napkins. You'd wake up and feel like you never left the store. Because in some ways, you hadn't. If you had roommates or siblings, they noticed the change too. You stopped complaining about chores. You cleaned the kitchen faster than anyone else. You washed dishes in silence. You folded towels like they were paper wrappers. The job made you efficient, even at home, but it also made you quieter. There wasn't much left to say at the end of a long shift, so you didn't say much. If you had a partner, someone you were dating or seeing on weekends, they felt it too. Maybe you'd go out after work, still in uniform. Maybe they'd tease you about the hat, the smell, the ketchup on your sleeve. But if they listened closely, they'd hear it in your voice. The weariness, the shift in how you talked, the way you carried yourself with a kind of practiced calm. Even when you were bone-tired, the job changed your posture, even on your days off, and yet there was pride in it. Not the kind you showed off, but the kind you felt quietly when someone said, "You're so reliable," or when your family asked for help budgeting groceries, and you actually knew how, or when you looked in the mirror and saw someone who could handle hard things without falling apart. Because that's what McDonald's gave you, even if it took more than it returned. A kind of emotional armor. The ability to stand still in the middle of chaos. to smile when things went wrong, to finish the job when no one else wanted to. You weren't just flipping burgers. You were building a version of yourself, one that could endure monotony, one that could rise to pressure, one that didn't need applause. So even if the uniform felt silly, even if the customers forgot your face, even if your classmates joked about just fast food, you knew better, because you knew who you were outside the uniform, too, and the distance between the two. That was where you learned who you were becoming by the early 1970s. McDonald's wasn't just a place where people ate, it was a phenomenon. Franchise locations were opening at breakneck speed across cities, states, and even oceans. In 1971, stores opened in Japan and the Netherlands. By 1974, the UK had its first Big Mac. By 1980, McDonald's had over 6,000 restaurants worldwide. The world was changing, and the job changed with it. The uniform still looked familiar. The menu was still simple. The rhythm was still there. But if you had worked at a McDonald's in the late 1950s or early 60s and walked into one in 1980, you wouldn't have recognized the system. The change started small. More rules, more steps, more branding. No longer just paper hats and white shirts. Now, it was gold, name tags, visor caps, striped polos, polyester slack siege, picked to match corporate color schemes. The smile wasn't just encouraged, it was trained. Training itself changed. New hires were handed corporate-approved manuals filled with diagrams, policies, charts. The McDonald's University in Oak Brook had grown into a true corporate where managers were trained like officers preparing for deployment. In the 50s, the McDonald brothers had taught new hires in person. By the 70s, training came from VHS tapes. You pressed play, and the system told you what to be. Franchisees operated under tighter guidelines. Now, everything had to be exact. The thickness of the fry, the time on the broiler, the color of the sauce, the placement of napkins in the bag, the temperature of the milkshake, VAT down to the decimal. Deviation wasn't just discouraged, it was audited, and if you didn't comply, you could lose your job. For workers, this meant more pressure, not because the food was harder to make, but because the stakes were higher. McDonald's wasn't the odd little burger stand on E Street anymore. It was an empire. And every shift you worked, you were a foot soldier in it. The job that once paid a teenager's bus fare or filled a summer gap was now a critical part of a billion-dollar brand's reputation. One late fry, one wrong order, one bad customer experience, and your store's customer rating could plummet. And guess who took the blame? Not corporate, not the CEO, not the investors. The investors, you, the person behind the counter. The systems became tighter. 2. The registers were now computerized. The timers were synced. The fryers beeped. The shake machines buzzed. Every sound told you what to do and when. And the job started to feel less human. In the 50s, you had moments of instinct cooking by smell, reading the line, adjusting on the fly. In the 70s, instinct was replaced with instruction. You were a node in the system, and your job was to keep the timing perfect. Some workers adapted. They learned the machines. They memorized the codes. They worked the new language of time cards, speed reports, and drive-through metrics. But others struggled. The job was faster now, more rigid, more anonymous, and you could feel it in the relationships, too. Shorter training, less camaraderie, more turnover, managers cycling in from other stores, barely knowing your name. The faces changed, the rules changed, and for workers who remembered the old days, the smell of fresh-cut onions, the handmade signs, the evening crew talking while they swept, it felt like something had been lost. Then came the drive-through, first tested in Arizona. In the mid-70s, it soon became standard. What used to be a counter experience face-to-face, tray-to-table was now a fast-paced ballet of headsets, speaker boxes, and window handoffs. The customer barely saw you. You took their order through static. You passed them their food through glass. You asked for their change and barely looked up, and just like that, the job changed again. More speed, less contact, less humanity. The menu expanded to filet-o-fish, Big Mac, quarter pounder, egg McMuffin, and with every new item came new procedures, new prep routines, new mistakes to make. The system responded by adding charts, laminated guides, timers, reminders, posters. Every inch of the kitchen now had instructions stuck to it, and if that made the food more reliable, it also made the job harder to love, because the more the system took over, the less you mattered. Still, workers showed up. Teenagers still got their first job behind the register. Parents picked up part-time shifts for extra income. Night crews bonded over clean-up playlists and shared fries in the parking lot after hours. The culture had shifted, but the core remained. You worked, you learned, you endured, and if you stayed long enough, you knew how to move through the machine without being swallowed by it. That was the gift the old-timers passed on. Not how to flip the perfect patty, not how to wrap a Big Mac in under 10 seconds, but how to stay human inside a system built for speed. How to make room for a joke, a breath, a second of eye contact before the next order came in. Because the job was changing fast, but the people inside it, they still mattered, even when the system forgot. By 1980, McDonald's was everywhere. The logo was a symbol. The food was a language. The brand had fully shifted from fast food to cultural cornerstone. You could find a McDonald's in downtown Chicago, in suburban Japan, on a military base in Germany, or beside a highway in Iowa. The menu was mostly the same. The colors were familiar. The arches were unmistakable. To the customer, it felt seamless. To the worker, it felt like the job had gone into overdrive. Everything was faster now. The 80s were all about volume, more customers, more food, more profit. You weren't serving 200 people in a lunch rush anymore. Now it was 500, maybe 600 on a Friday. The kitchen that once ran on muscle memory and shared glances now ran on auditory chaos. Timers beeping, fryers buzzing, managers shouting codes, headset chatter from the drive-thru overlapping with in-store orders. You didn't just move faster. You thought faster. You reacted faster. There was no room to fall behind, no time to catch up. If you stumbled, the whole rhythm collapsed, and you were the one who'd hear about it. The systems adapted, but not always to the benefit of the crew. Registers became PA's terminals, touchscreens, with menus built in. No more memorizing prices, no more ringing items by hand. But it didn't make the job easier. It just shifted the stress down. You had to memorize menus across multiple screens, upsell automatically, match promotional pricing, manage coupons. All while maintaining speed and smiling. The customer still expected a perfect bag, but now they expected it in 60 seconds or less. And when they didn't get it, they complained. And those complaints went further than ever before. Because now, McDonald's had call centers, surveys, comment cards. If a customer had a bad experience, it didn't just disappear into the air. It became a report. It triggered a meeting. It landed on the manager's desk, canned sometimes on yours. You were being watched not just by your boss, but by the entire feedback apparatus of a multinational corporation. And that changed the job in a fundamental way. You weren't just doing tasks. You were performing all the time. Then came the uniform overhaul, gone were the paper hats. Now it was branded visors, embroidered polar slacks, even neckties for managers. Every store had to conform. Every worker had to look sharp. But these uniforms weren't just about presentation. They were about branding. You weren't just a worker. Now, you were a representative. You didn't just flip burgers. You represented McDonald's. And that meant watching your tone, keeping your posture, following procedure to the letter even when it didn't make sense. You could be replaced in a day. And you knew it. Training also became hyper-formalized. There were binders, training days, tests, checklists, video modules on VHS, with cheerful narrators explaining grease, safety, and greeting technique. You were told how to smile, what words to say, how many napkins to include per meal. Every interaction had a script, and if you strayed from it, that too was noted. And yet, for all its pressure, the job still had heart. Not from corporate, but from the people inside it. Night shift closers still shared late fries by the back door. Morning preppers still swapped stories over coffee before the lobby opened. Teenagers still met their best friends, and sometimes their first loves, on a shared fryer station. Workers joked in code, covered for each other, smuggled an extra nugget into the box just to make a kid smile. It wasn't in the manual, but it mattered, because even as the system grew colder, faster, and more corporate, the people inside it kept each other warm. You could feel the disconnect growing between corporate's shiny ads and your sore feet, between the slogan on the bag and the tone in your manager's voice, between the smiling cartoon training videos and the sheer exhaustion of a 12-hour close, followed by an open . And yet, you still showed up, because the job paid, because the routine made sense, because you were good at it, because, in a way, it was a little world you understood, even when it changed, even when it didn't feel fair, even when no one said thank you. By the end of the 1980s, McDonald's wasn't just a job, it was a machine that taught you how to survive any job. If you could handle this, you could handle anything. By the 1990s, McDonald's had transformed again. It was no longer just a place to eat. It was a symbol, a target, and a topic. The brand was everywhere, from Times Square to Tokyo, from commercials to classroom debates. It had gone from fast food to cultural icon, and then to something else, a battleground, for globalization, for health, for wages, for culture, for what it meant to be modern. And the workers, they were right in the middle, caught between the smiling ads and the increasingly complex job behind the counter. If you clocked in during the early 1990s, you stepped into a store that looked sleek, polished, colorful. It wasn't like the 70s, stores dim, earthy, utilitarian. Now it was all pastels and shine, plastic booths and tiled floors, clean lines, brighter signs. And in many places, the store didn't feel like yours anymore. It felt like a showroom. Every item in place, every light angled just so, Every worker, just another extension of the design. The job had changed to dot in the 50s. You cooked burgers dot in the 2000s. You were part cook, part customer service rep, part technician, part public relations agent. You ran registers that now included digital prompts. You monitored customer satisfaction scores posted in the break room like baseball stats. You adapted to rotating promotions, updated procedures, and the constant presence of corporate campaigns. Monopoly, 241 South, Beanie Babies. Each campaign brought chaos, different packaging, different pricing, new questions, new complaints, and through it all, your job was the same. Stay fast, stay polite, stay invisible. There was a growing sense of performance fatigue, because you weren't just doing the work, you were performing. The illusion that it was easy done, and behind the scenes, it was anything but. The pace was brutal, the staffing tight, the expectations sky-high. Customers now came in expecting perfect, expecting smiles, expecting you to act like the commercials, and if you slip, your tone was flat, your pace slow, your uniform wrinkled. You could get written up, because the job had become part theatre, and the script was owned by someone far above your pay grade. This was also the era of increased media scrutiny, books, documentaries, news segments. Everyone was asking, is McDonald's healthy? Are they underpaying workers? Are they hurting small towns? Are they training kids or exploiting them? And while the debates raged in classrooms and city councils, the workers behind the counter kept scrubbing grills, restocking saucers, and folding cardboard nugget boxes. They weren't invited to the conversation. They were too busy doing the labor that made the conversation possible. The kitchen changed too. Microwaves were introduced. Pre-assembled ingredients became the norm. More packaging, less prep. This made things more consistent, but also more mechanical. Workers who'd once fried eggs, fresh or sliced onions by hand, now pressed buttons and waited for timers. It was still work, still tiring, but more and more it felt detached. You were watching the process happen around you, not inside it, and that created a strange kind of emptiness. The workers kept changing to don't now. There were more adults, more immigrants, more people for whom this wasn't a stepping stone, but a lifeline. The job was still sold as flexible, fun, and fast, but inside, it was rigid, demanding, and sometimes quietly cruel. You'd work a split shift, go home for 2 hours, then come back to close. You'd have your hours cut without warning. You'd be asked to do more with fewer staff, and expected to smile while doing it. And you did, because rent was due, because someone needed diapers, because quitting wasn't an option. Still, there were moments of agency. Veteran workers passed down their wisdom. Managers who had risen from the floor shielded their crews when they could. Friendships formed between line cooks and front counter staff, rooted in shared exhaustion and quiet victories. You learned tricks, how to avoid fryer burns, how to speak a cheeseburger. How to time your break to miss the rush, how to sneak a quiet breath behind the bun warmer without getting caught. You learned how to survive the system, and sometimes that felt like a win. And then came health pressure. In the early 2000s, lawsuits, documentaries like Super Size Me, and school boards all pointed fingers at fast food culture, and who stood in the line of fire. Not the CEO, not the investors, not the ad teams who'd pitched burgers to kids for decades. That was you, the cashier, the grill op, the guy mopping the soda spill by the ice machine. You were the face of the brand, And some days it felt like the blame came with the apron. Still, even then, even at the height of the pressure, some workers found meaning in the job, in the ritual, in the people, in the knowledge that they could keep a store running when everything else fell apart. Because, in the end, the machines didn't prep themselves, the floors didn't clean themselves, the customers didn't serve themselves, not yet. You were still essential, whether they wanted to admit it or not. By the mid-2000s, the world outside the restaurant had transformed and the world inside McDonald's was trying to keep up. Cell phones became smartphones. The internet moved from desktop to pocket. Customers no longer just walked into a McDonald's hungry, they walked in connected, distracted, and already comparing calorie counts. The expectations changed, so did the tools. And once again, the job transformed under your feet. The first time you saw the kiosk, it didn't look like much. Just a tall screen near the counter. No human, no cashier, no small talk. You watched a customer walk up, tap their order, swipe a card, and step aside. No interaction, no delay. At first, it seemed like a gimmick. Then, it started replacing people. The front counter crew once, the public face of McDonald's, was now optional. Fewer cashiers, fewer voices, fewer chances to even say, "Hi, how are you?" The kiosk didn't need a break, didn't forget the order, didn't ask for a raise. But when something went wrong, the machine didn't fix it. You did. Suddenly, workers had a new role. Machine babysitter. You wiped fingerprints, reset frozen screens, explained to customers how to scroll through combo menus, handled the confusion when a sandwich was missed. No one knew who to blame. The irony was sharp. You were being replaced by a machine, but the machine still needed you. You just weren't up front anymore. You were behind the screen, inside the kitchen. Things got even faster now that orders could pour in from kiosks, delivery apps, and mobile phones. There was no natural rhythm to a shift. There were bursts. 10 orders dropped into the queue in 30 seconds, all different, all customized, all needing to be hot, bagged, and ready for pickup now. You didn't hear the order. You didn't see the customer. You just saw the screen light up. And the expectation was always the same: perfect speed, 0 mistakes. Delivery changed the game to Uber Eats, DoorDash, Mick Delivery. Now, you weren't just serving customers in store, you were prepping for invisible ones. The guy ordering a breakfast sandwich from 3 miles away. The woman adding no pickles at 10:58 p.m. The family ordering 3 Happy Meals and a caramel frap while stuck in traffic. You didn't speak to them. You didn't even know their names. But you felt the pressure every time a driver walked in and said, "Hey, that order ready yet?" And still you weren't allowed to slow down. The job was faster, more complicated, more fragmented, but management still ran things like it was 1985. Same shift goals, same customer service expectations, same labor hours cut as soon as business slowed. You might be doing twice the work, but with half the crew, and that meant stress. Not the kind you could explain, but the kind that built quietly in your spine, in your shoulders, in your jaw, the kind that never fully left, even after you clocked out. Even break time changed. You used to sit, talk, laugh a little. Now you scrolled. Social media, memes, texts, from family. You saw jokes about fast food jobs, saw people say just flip burgers, and you swallowed the bitterness. Because they didn't understand. They didn't know what it took to time fries, restock sauces, prep 6 orders while a kiosk flashed red and a delivery app flagged you for being too slow. They didn't know the feeling of being responsible for everything and recognized for nothing. Managers tried to adapt. Some were helpful, stepping in, running food, praising effort. Others leaned harder into control, obsessing over order accuracy metrics, watching the camera feeds, sending shift reports with bolded names. The message was clear: do more, smile more, don't mess up. And yet through it, all workers endured, because some things didn't change. The satisfaction of packing a bag perfectly, the joy of helping a confused customer get what they actually wanted, the rhythm of a kitchen crew that could wordlessly handle a 10-order stack. The machines may have changed the flow, but they didn't replace the heart of the job that still belonged to the workers, and no screen could ever do what they did shift after shift, under pressure, without praise. The spring of 2020 didn't begin like anything unusual. The shifts were the same, the menu was the same, the pressure was the same, and then everything changed. It started with rumors, whispers of a virus overseas, customers talking about flights being cancelled, a little more hand sanitizer at the counter. Then, almost overnight, everything locked down. Restaurants closed their dining rooms, schools emptied, offices went remote, and fast food kept going, because someone, somewhere, decided you're essential. At first, the word felt strange. Essential sounded important. It sounded heroic. But for the workers behind counters, at fryers, in drive-through windows, it didn't feel like praise. It felt like pressure, like fear. No one really knew what was happening at first. The rules changed daily. Wear a mask, wash your hands, sanitize the register, close the lobby, open the drive-through. Now add curbside pickup. Now contactless delivery. Customers still came. Some wore masks, some didn't. Some yelled dot, and through it all, the fryers kept humming dot. Inside the kitchen, everything was off. Half the crew was missing. Some had gotten sick. Some were caring for family. Some simply never came back. Those who stayed had to do everything. Order taker, grill, prep, bag, runner. There weren't enough people, and there weren't enough answers. You wore gloves until your hands cracked. You changed masks 3 times a shift. You stopped tasting or smelling the food, not because you had COVID, but because your senses were numb from stress. There were days when it was terrifying. You stood 2 feet from a stranger, taking their card. You packed bags for delivery drivers who came in from 5 other restaurants. You handled money, then touched food, then sanitized again. And you wondered, is this the moment I catch it? Is this the shift that sends me home sick? But you kept going, because the bills didn't stop, because your family needed help, because no one else showed up. Management tried. Some provided masks, some built plexiglass barriers, some posted signs and thanked you in meetings, but others cut hours, skipped hazard pay, blamed you when customers complained about delays. You were essential, but not protected. You were visible, but unsupported. You were praised in speeches, but still cleaning ketchup off a trash can for $10 an hour. There were quiet acts of bravery. Co-workers covering shifts for each other. Team leads checking in, even when they were overwhelmed. Crews pulling together when someone cried during a rush. No one clapped. No one televised it. No hashtags, but it mattered. You showed up. You worked the line. You sanitized the screens. You kept the doors open when the world felt closed. And then came the exhaustion, not physical, not entirely. It was emotional. It was the feeling of being stretched too thin for too long, working in a mask for 8 hours straight. Hearing the same "we appreciate you" message from corporate while your paycheck stayed the same. Watching drive-through lines wrap around the block while you ran the station alone. And when you got home, you didn't rest. You worried about the virus, about your grandmother, about your rent, about your cough. You were never off the clock. Still, you did the job. You learned how to move quickly without rushing, how to nod instead of speak through a mask, how to pass a bag without touching a hand, how to spot fatigue in your coworkers' eyes and cover for them. No questions asked, because that's what you did. Even before the pandemic, only now. The world was finally watching. But here's the truth. When it ended, when the masks came off, when the dining room reopened, the world moved on, and you were still there, still flipping, still mopping, still smiling, still essential, but no longer noticed. And that, perhaps, was the hardest part. When the world began reopening in mid-2021, McDonald's workers were some of the first called back. But for many, the reality was, they'd never really left. They'd been behind the counter while the dining room stayed dark. They'd stood by the drive-through window, masked and fogged, while the rest of the city quarantined. They'd flipped burgers, cleaned restrooms, mopped floors, and packed endless delivery bags during a global health crisis. Now that the world had decided to move on, they were expected to move on to no recovery, no processing, no thank you, just clock in, pick up where you left off, smile. Only something had changed. Everything had changed. Not in the equipment, not in the menu, not even in the uniform, but in the tension in the room, in the tone of the manager, in the eyes of the closing shift, in the way workers greeted each other quietly, cautiously, with the look of people who'd been running on adrenaline for too long, for decades. McDonald's had depended on a basic truth, that people would show up for the job, for the customers, for the rhythm. But after 2020, that rhythm was shattered, and some people didn't come back. Some never planned to. Some took jobs at warehouses or delivery startups that paid more and asked less. Some moved in with family, downshifted their lives, and left the workforce altogether. And those who did return, they found themselves doing more than ever. A full team used to mean 6, 7, even 10 people on a peak shift. Now, you were lucky if you had 4. 1 on grill, 1 on register, 1 on drive-through, 1 floating running food, cleaning spills, wiping kiosk screens, bagging orders. It was too much. It was unsustainable. But it was expected, because that's what McDonald's had built itself on. Efficiency, and after 70 years, it was no longer just food that needed to be fast. It was people. Managers were under strain. Corporate sent down new KPIs, new protocols, new compliance metrics, health codes, labor hour caps, digital order speed targets, training videos, sanitation logs, weekly crew morale checks, all while managing a store that was often short-staffed, overwhelmed, and at risk of burnout. Some managers cracked, others turned into watchdogs. A few, the good ones, became shields doing what they could to protect their crew from the worst of it. But no matter who was in charge, the workers felt it. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was a pressure chamber. The customers came back to but not as the same people. Some were kind, thankful, patient, Others, wound tight from months of isolation and frustration. They snapped, they yelled, they demanded to speak to someone, anyone. And the person they yelled at was you, the 17-year-old on drive-thru who forgot to add extra ketchup. The mum of 2 working a double shift because rent was due. The night shift crew member filling 6 online orders. While getting screamed at for a missing straw, it was relentless. And it started to wear people down in a different way. Not just physically, not just emotionally, but existentially. Workers started asking questions they'd never had time to ask before. Why am I doing this? Why is this okay? Why is this job treated like it's worthless, when the world literally didn't work without it? And that shift quiet at first was everywhere. People vented on Twitter, posted on TikTok, wrote on napkins in break rooms, shared stories in group chats and subreddits and long 1 a.m. phone calls. And for the first time in a long time, the voices of fast food workers weren't just being heard, they were amplifying each other. And then came the protests. Not one big explosion, but a series of sparks. In California, Missouri, New York, crew members walking out, holding signs, sharing payslips, speaking to press. They weren't asking for luxury. They were asking for dignity, $15 an hour, paid sick time, basic benefits, a voice in their own working conditions. They weren't quitting the job. They were demanding to be seen inside it. Because they knew the truth. This system had been built on their backs. And for the most part, it had pretended they weren't even there. Some stores responded, raises, improved scheduling, new training modules that included mental wellness and respectful communication. Corporate rolled out statements, videos, guidelines, but for many workers, it was too late or too little, because they'd finally realized something the system had spent decades avoiding. They were the most replaceable, until they weren't. Once people stopped showing up, the store couldn't run. It didn't matter how slick the kiosks were, how advanced the app became, how fast the fryer timers beeped, without a human to bag the order, clean the counter, handle the chaos. The whole thing fell apart. That realization didn't lead to revolution. It led to something quieter. Boundaries. Workers who once said yes to every shift started saying no. Workers who once gave 2 weeks' notice just walked out. People chose to preserve their bodies, their minds, their futures, even if it meant disappointing someone. And in that space came something even rarer, self-respect. Not pride in the brand, not loyalty to the logo, but pride in endurance. Pride in knowing how to handle a packed lobby and a crashing soda machine with nothing but your wits and a hair tie. Pride in surviving a job that the world dismissed, even as it relied on it. By the end of 2023, the story hadn't ended. Some stores were better, some were worse, some were understaffed, still posting help-wanted signs. Others were rebuilding, learning, adapting. But the people inside the uniform, they were not the same. They were tired. They were wiser. They were less willing to be ignored because they had carried the system through a global trauma. And now they knew what they were worth, even if the world didn't. You've been standing in these shoes for a long time. Now, from 1948 to now, through polyester uniforms and paper hats, steel counters and touchscreen kiosks, walk-up windows and global delivery platforms. You've smelled the fryer oil, heard the buzz of the shake machine, felt the heat of a summer shift, the cold bite of a winter close when the mop water hit your ankles. You've clocked in with calloused fingers. You've packed bags for strangers you'd never meet. You've folded burger wrappers with a rhythm that lived in your bones. And now, here at the end of it all, it's time to step back and look at the job, not just for what it did, but for what it meant. McDonald's didn't invent fast food, but it perfected a kind of system the world didn't know it needed. Speed, uniformity, control. It promised the same burger, the same fries, the same soda on your well, and to deliver that kind of consistency, it didn't just build a business, it built a machine. And inside that machine were people. Millions of them, most of them just like you. They were 16-year-olds on their first job, single mums working the night shift, students saving for school, retirees picking up weekend hours, workers on visas, people in between things, people trying to make things work. Some stayed for a summer, some stayed for decades. All of them knew the smell of the fryer room, the tension of a wrong order, the rhythm of the close, the sound of a headset crackling just as the line reached the door. All of them left a little piece of themselves on the floor tiles, and while the world never treated it like much, it was much. Because this job wasn't just burgers, it was a proving ground. It taught you how to move under pressure, how to handle chaos, how to work fast without falling apart, how to make something right without being asked, just because it was the right thing to do. It taught you how to carry 1,000 tiny weights and somehow keep smiling. Yes, it was exhausting. Yes, it was repetitive. Yes, it was sometimes thankless. But the pride came anyway. Not from praise, from competence, from the way you could prep an entire sandwich in under 10 seconds, from the way your fingers learned to fold the wrapper without thinking, from the way you could tell if fries were done just by the smell, from the way your coworkers tired, overworked, quiet would give you a nod at the end of the shift. Not a celebration, just a shared "we did it," and some days that was everything. The customers came and went, some grateful, some cruel, some just hungry. They barely saw the people behind the counter. But that never stopped you from doing the job. Not perfectly, but with consistency, with care, even when no one cared back. The system evolved around you. Registers became tablets. Shifts became algorithms. The burger flipper became a robot in some cities. The customer became an app. And you became sometimes literally invisible. But even then, you found ways to stay human. An extra sauce slipped into the bag. A quick word to calm a frustrated parent. A laugh in the back room after hours. A whispered heads up when someone was struggling. You found each other and held the system together from the inside. You've been through so much. The night shift when the shake machine exploded. The early morning opens where the coffee pot never worked. The ice storms. The summer rushes. The overnights where the only thing that kept you going was a shared playlist on someone's phone. You've seen the system fail, and you've kept it running anyway. That's the part the history books won't mention. That's the part the CEOs never quite put in the annual report. But it's real, more real than the golden arches, more real than the commercials, more real than the slogan. Because those arches didn't flip the patties, you did. Those fries didn't season themselves, you did that. The customers didn't smile on their own, you smiled first. And maybe the world will never say thank you. Maybe it'll always see the uniform and not the person. Maybe it'll keep calling it unskilled, even though the job is harder than half the offices it delivers to. But here, now, in this quiet hour, let it be said, you mattered. Your hands, your back, your breath, your effort. They built something enormous and kept it moving long after the world stopped noticing. So maybe this story started in 1948 with two brothers, a new idea, and a little building in San Bernardino. But it ends here, with everything you carried, with everything you gave, with the knowledge that, yes, maybe it was just a job, but that job was never small, not to the people who worked it, not to the people who lived through it, not to the people who stood shoulder to shoulder behind that counter and got it done.